Meninges. Really, this is a continuation of the story about the cerebral spinal fluid and the ventricles. It's all going to come together in this page. Now, because I like to be gentle with my students, let's start with a soft mother. So get your green highlighter, and I'm going to show you the meninge, called the Pia Mater, that rests directly on the neuronal tissue. See if you can follow the convolutions, the gyri and the sulci of the brain. So this Pia Mater is a gentle membrane that encloses, or actually is intimate with the neurons of the brain. So all of these little bumps on the brain will be covered with Pia Mater. And when you dissect, jump over here. I don't want you to do the lining the ventricles right now. When you dissect the sheep brain, or when you look in APR at the human cadaver, you'll notice that brains are shiny, and the shiny look comes from the Pia Mater that's resting on the neuronal tissue. Okay, we're almost done. Okay, label that the Pia Mater, and I'm going to label it down here. I want to leave us ample room for a lot of different things on this page. So the Pia Mater is the innermost meninge, and it's Latin for soft mother, and it rests on the actual brain tissue, which is why it has all those wrinkles, just like the actual surface of the brain. Okay, now the next layer is called the Arachnoid Mater. And we're going to highlight that in orange. Okay, so we'll start at the top. It's the next layer up. See the Arachnoid Villi? If you want, you can start by highlighting those and then going around. And this is actually subdural hematoma, and I'm going to talk about that more later, but that's a homeostatic imbalance. But first, let's go ahead and finish highlighting the Arachnoid Mater. In this view, where we're at now is encircling the cerebellum, the back of the brain. And then up and around. Okay. Now the last thing I want to put on here about the highlighting for the Arachnoid Mater is that it goes right down the spinal cord. So you do have meninges that protect your spinal cord, the same ones that are around your brain. So if someone gets meningitis, then the inflammation may be located in the spine, spinal meningitis. If it goes to the brain, it could eventually get into the neuronal tissue, in which case we would call it encephalitis. Okay, so what I just did is I added on the green Pia Mater going right down the spinal cord, and then you see the Arachnoid Mater as well. Now let's label the Arachnoid Mater. Oops, not green, sorry, orange. Orange label. And some of you are probably already guessing you know what arachnoid means, right? It means spider. So this means spider mother. Arachnophobia is fear of spiders. Well, why did they call this layer the arachnoid or the spider mother? The reason is because upon dissection, there can be seen little thin tendrils of tissue that protrude into the subarachnoid space, like this. And so it looks kind of spider webby. And just kind of put a few of these scattered webs protruding from the bottom of the Arachnoid Mater. There's a reason for these spider webs. They provide kind of a tent-like support for the fluid that flows through here. The subarachnoid space, the space between the Arachnoid Mater and the Pia Mater, is where the cerebral spinal fluid is circulating. So we'll use, let's put right here that the subarachnoid space, sub means below, right? So the subarachnoid space contains the CSF. And now we can use a yellow highlighter to fill in where that cerebral spinal fluid is. So see how it's circulating up and around. You can go ahead and put it into the Arachnoid Villi because it's in there. And it's going up and around the brain, providing buoyancy and cushion, most likely helping with communication and information in the brain in ways that we don't understand, maintaining appropriate intracranial pressure by the amount of fluid, not too much, not too little. If somebody doesn't have enough of this, they can get an absolute ferocious headache. That's what happens after an epidural goes wrong. We'll talk about that later too, but basically an epidural at the bottom of the spine, if they pop too far in, and some CSF can drain out of the spinal cord, and then there's less in the brain, right? Because it's kind of all flowing down by gravity, and the brain is like squashing down on the foramen magnum, the exit hole from the skull, and it from what I hear, is one of the most painful headaches you could ever have in your life. Okay, so everywhere we just colored in yellow is cerebral spinal fluid, but you know from the previous page that there's also, of course, cerebral spinal fluid in the ventricles. And actually, let's put the choroid plexus in there too while we're at it, just to remind ourselves that it's where it's being formed, right? So the purple are the choroid plexuses. So the choroid plexus filters the blood to produce clear cerebral spinal fluid. So it's going to flow fill the lateral ventricles and then flow through the interventricular foramen to the third ventricle This line I drew right across here is that isthmus that connects the two sides of the thalamus, because brain tissue-wise, on either side of the third ventricle, depending on where you do the section, you're looking at the diencephalon. So tissue of the diencephalon is connected by that little bridge. And then the CSF will flow down through the cerebral aqueduct to the fourth ventricle. And now you can see it has that choice to make. Some of it, by gravity, will kind of flow down and out, and so when it goes out these apertures from the fourth ventricle, it can go up and around the brain or down the spinal cord. And also a little bit goes down what's called the central canal, right through the middle of the spinal cord. But if you were ever going to get a sampling of cerebral spinal fluid from somewhere near the spinal cord, it would need to be done below the bottom of the spinal cord, so you're actually reaching into the subarachnoid space and never into the central canal to retrieve CSF. Okay, so I'm going to use a black pen to label this. The yellow represents cerebral spinal fluid. You can see that throughout. Okay, so next let's look at the Dura Mater, and we'll use let's see what color for that. Hold on a second. I don't think I want to use blue. Maybe the purple for the Dura Mater. It's this kind of gray structure. Should be pretty easy to follow along with your highlighting, because I purposely made it a little different in color. The Dura Mater is really tough. And sure enough, dura means hard mother. We get the word durable from this Latin root. Okay, a couple things about the Dura Mater that I would like you to notice. First of all, you might have seen that it has two layers. It has the periosteal layer and the meningeal layer. The reason we notice that is because there are places where they separate. So if you follow my pen, see how right here this all just looks like one piece? Well, it's actually two layers stuck together. And then we continue down here, but then look what happens right here around the ear. Actually, whereas you're getting close to the cerebellum, the separation between the cerebrum and the cerebellum, the layers split. So this is the meningeal layer that separates, and the periosteal layer stays adhering to the skull. Here in periosteal means around the bone, and it stays adhered to the bone at all times until it gets to the spinal cord. And then the meningeal layer separates at the sinuses. And I also want to make a note that really this only matters in the skull or in the brain. In the spinal cord, we don't talk about there being the two layers because they don't ever separate. And the Dura Mater of the spinal cord doesn't adhere to the vertebrae as much. Okay, so you notice that here is a sinus, here is a sinus, and here is a sinus. And we'll come back in the next video and look at those.